I'm Brandon Staglin. Welcome to One Mind Brainwaves. Today's topic is youth mental health and destigmatization. Growing for years and made worse by the pandemic, mental health challenges, including addiction, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so many other facets of mental illness, have been becoming widespread and common throughout our society. If you're experiencing something like this, you should know you're not alone. These challenges have been particularly acute and severe and common amongst young people in our world today. Joining us later in the program will be an expert on child and adolescent psychiatry. He's the director of the Stanford Center for Youth and Mental Health and Wellbeing, Dr. Stephen Adelsheim. So we'll talk to him a little bit later. But first, veteran documentarian Ken Burns has executive produced an important two-part documentary film to premiere on PBS stations around the country later this month. It's directed by Eric and Christopher Ewers, and it features the amazing stories of 20 young people who are dealing bravely with the mental health challenges and navigating the system. One Mind is proud to be a collaborating outreach partner for the film Hiding in Plain Sight: Youth Mental Illness. Here's a look.
I grew up in low poverty. I always was in public housing my whole life, so it was very difficult to deal with. I remember as a little kid, I walked off into a field to pick flowers and kind of heard my friends calling my name, and I would turn around and there was really no one there. It was very confusing for me and kind of frightening.
Joining me now to share some of her own story is somebody you just saw in this film clip. She is a 19-year-old student earning her chemistry degree and studying for a career in forensics. Yanerry, thanks so much for joining us on Brainwaves today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. It's great to see you today. And viewers, thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to post in the chat section of this webcast at any time, please feel free to do this, or any stories you'd like to share. Also, if you know of anyone who might benefit from what we're sharing in this webcast today, please share this video with them. Thanks. So Yanerry, this is a really powerful film that you're in with brave, honest stories by so many amazing young people like you. What made you want to participate in this film?
Well, for a long time, personally, me growing up, mental health wasn't a thing that was oh, it's okay to speak of, or it's less of a more normal thing in my family. Really, throughout my childhood, I really had no one to tell me this is okay or this happens to some people, and that really inspired me to want to reach out to other people who have experienced what I have experienced, and to help them just get the idea that this is okay, this happens.
Yeah, that's a great reason. I mean, so many people, when they're sick, especially with mental illness, it's invisible, right? And from a physical standpoint, and so it's easy to hide it. And like when I was ill so many years ago with schizophrenia, I hid it for 5 years from people I knew, people I worked with, and it was just really a burden for me. But now that I share it, I'm able to see how people share their experiences too. Have you found that people open up to you when you share with them?
Definitely. Amongst my friends, when we discuss this whole topic of me being on this documentary, and there's wow, that's so inspiring. It starts this whole conversation of just multiple people speaking about their experiences where they wouldn't have felt normal unless someone else came up to them and was like, hey, what's going on? Or just having that conversation. It brings more awareness to that, and it's okay to have that conversation, really.
Yeah, that must make people feel more comfortable in their own skins with what they're dealing with. So it's great you're doing that. Thank you. What has the experience of being in the film been like? You did share a little bit about that just now, but has it changed the way you view your own mental health and well-being?
Well, my experience at first, it was very nerve-wracking, but after it was just a big relief, and going through it over and over again in my head, you know that you're doing the right thing. You're doing something that's going to move in such a way that you couldn't even imagine. And it definitely has changed my view of my mental health. For 7 years, I haven't told anyone about what happened or what I experienced. And now that I was able to give this opportunity to me and just see other people talk about it and be okay with it, it definitely makes me feel the same way.
That's great. Yeah, it's contagious. This comfort, this ability to accept what we're going through. It's great that you inspire other people like that. It's very powerful. Thankfully, in part for the work you're doing, we're now seeing more open and frank conversations around mental health and mental illness in our world. But people's stories are different. Everyone's story is unique and often complex. Why would you say it's important for people to share their true stories about what they're going through?
I think it's very important where because some people tend to keep it in and it's more of like a burden for them. And for me personally, just talking about what happened, it felt just so much relief. And going into it, you're nervous and you don't think that that's what's going to happen. But once it's all done, you're like, wow, like I should have been said that. I think it's very important to also talk to people, even just amongst friends, people who are close to you, your closest family, to just start that conversation of like, speaking on mental health, it's really good for you at the end.
That's so wise. And you've learned this through your own experience. That's the most powerful way to learn.
Yes.
It's great you're sharing this with your family as well. And because, family is for so many people, kind of the first line of caring, and families generally are very great supports for people who are struggling, as I have, and you may have as well. What is it you want people to know, or how would you like people to change the way they think about mental health?
Well, for me personally, I think it's very important to let young teens know about mental health. This whole conversation where you go into high school and you have this health class, and it's normal. People expect to have that. I think that having a mental health class teaching young people about this kind of teaches them at a young age it's normal. So growing into it, it's like, oh yeah, I learned about that a long time ago. That's okay. And rather than, people talking about it later on in life. And, it's all very well better to learn early in your life about this and about mental health. I think it definitely help normalize it better.
Yeah, for sure. It's like something that we all deal with, and you know that from the get-go. What helps you maintain your sense of well-being and resilience today? I know you love to hike.
Yeah, hiking is very important for me, the physical aspect. It's whatever I'm struggling with or going through a hard time, I take it all in a hike, and by the time you're tired at the end of the hike, you're like, oh, I don't even feel like thinking about anything, anything that's stressful. Also, a thing that helps me is I know that throughout life, even like 200 years from now, no one will really remember me. No one will, hey, that one time you embarrassed yourself in class. Yeah, I remember that. So that definitely helps me just move throughout life. And it's like, if I make a mistake, that's okay. I got to go on and keep going.
Yeah, that's very wise, knowing that, keeping that perspective in mind. And I wonder if hiking helps you find that perspective. It does for me. I remember when I was about your age, I'd love to hike up to the top of high hills and things and look out over the scenery, over the city below, and think about how there's so many lives down there. And I'm just one tiny part of everything that's out there. And help me keep things in kind of a broader perspective and not worry so much about what I was worried about to begin with. Yeah. Stories like yours and your peers in the film go a long way to help reduce stigma and provide hope and let people know simply that they're not alone. What is the main thing you'd like people to take away from the film Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness?
One of the biggest things I want people to really take from the film is to bring more awareness to it, to see how easily people were able to express their stories, that it's okay for you to express yours too. I really want people to take that from it and really just be able to feel comfortable enough to express what they're going through.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. The movie brings me a lot of hope to have watched the part of it that I watched, especially your part there. Is there anything about your story that you'd like to underscore that can bring people hope?
Really about my story, I think that for me personally, I take certain losses or certain bad things that I go through, I take it as a gain. I always try to ask myself, what am I learning from this? What is this teaching me? What is it going to be useful for me in the future? And I always try to look at that aspect rather than being like, oh my God, this is something I'm going through. This is so bad. I'm so hurt, stuff like that.
I love that. They call that the growth mindset.
Mhm.
It's really healthy. And yeah, I'm glad you have that mindset already ingrained in you. It's something people have to learn, but yeah, good on you. That's fantastic. Yanerry, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really great to talk with you. Hiding in Plain Sight Youth Mental Illness premieres on PBS stations around the country over on June 27th and 28th, 2022. Please check your local PBS listings. And if you'd like to learn more about the PBS resources surrounding the film, please visit wellbeings.org. Thanks so much. With me now is Dr. Stephen Adelsheim, the director of the Stanford Center for Youth Mental Health and Wellbeing at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today on Brainwaves. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Brandon. Really glad to be here.
Good. Yeah, always good to see you. So viewers, don't forget, you can post questions or comments in the comment section of this webcast at any time. If you have any stories or thoughts you'd like to share, please do. And if you can think of anyone who might benefit from the information we're sharing in today's webcast, can you please share it with them? Thanks. So Steve, you are an expert on youth mental health and well-being, as your title implies, and you have much experience in this field. Recent studies in the experiences of teachers and counselors and students are showing us that there's an increasingly deteriorating picture of youth mental well-being throughout our country today. Just how, in your perspective, just how severe is this crisis that we're facing?
Well, Brandon, as you well know, we really had a crisis in terms of youth mental health really before this pandemic began and things became much more difficult. Our data was really clear that while 1 in 5 young people may have had a mental health related issue, 79% of those 1 in 5 were unable to access care prior to this pandemic. We've had huge issues in terms of workforce. We had increasing youth suicide rates up through 2019 and really continued to face challenges in helping young people access care. I think to your point, as we've seen, the grief that many youth and families are facing, whether it's related to losses of family members, losses of jobs, increased economic stress. We've continued to see increasing rates of young people, coming to emergency rooms with anxiety, with depression, with suicide attempts, really as the stress is impacting not only our young people, but their families as well. And so it really has become an increasingly challenging time. And as you mentioned, teachers and counselors, everyone trying to negotiate schools and back to schools and jobs is facing stress as well. So all of us as adults are even more challenged too, which makes our ability to support our youth even that much harder.
Yeah, and thank goodness you're there at the Center for Youth and Mental Health and Wellbeing to offer some support for the youth at Stanford and perhaps in the wider community. I was actually, as I mentioned a moment ago, just at Stanford recently and talked to a professor there. He mentioned that youth mental health and the student body mental health is a major focus for Stanford these days, and I assume you're a major part of that. Do you work with youth who are struggling in that regard, and how's your experience been there?
Well, as you mentioned, we've been trying to work closely with young people who are in school right now, who are continuing to face these challenges. We've had some recent losses by suicide on the campus as well that have been very highly publicized. And, part of our work in terms of support has been trying to work with people supporting the youth in the different dormitories and across the campus, as well as the leaders, to be able to support the students who are dealing with these losses and challenges, while also navigating the end of the school year, exam times. So, there's been a great deal of need for additional support. One of the things on a positive note that we've seen is, we've had some really wonderful opportunities to work with the student newspaper, the Stanford Daily, which, has had a lot of responsibility in terms of reporting on these issues. And as we've been involved in issues around the media impact in terms of writing about suicide and youth suicide and how that can increase or decrease risk of suicide contagion. And the Stanford Daily editors and staff have just been amazing in terms of the responsibility they've taken on to be thoughtful about their stories, to develop stories that also highlight, the resiliency of young people and the success of young people in confronting challenges and handling them well, which we see as really important in helping people move forward in successful ways.
Yeah, it's great examples there of how young people can overcome the challenges they're facing with supports that are available, it sounds like. And the film that we're featuring in the webcast as well today, Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness, which will premiere on PBS stations at the end of the month, has some more stories like that, as we heard from Yanerry earlier in the webcast today as well. So great examples of journalism and media coverage that can actually be positive for young people. As you mentioned, we faced essentially relentless trauma from so many sources over the past several years, including economic uncertainty and political strife and racial tension, armed conflict overseas, and all against the background of an ongoing pandemic in our society all throughout the world. So it's not surprising that young people are experiencing mental health challenges. But I'm curious, from your perspective, how do young people process all these traumatic stresses? Are they more resilient in general than adults because their brains are younger, or are their brains, as they're still developing and their minds have less experience to draw from to put things in perspective, is it harder for them to process these, would you say?
Well, from the involvement I've had with young people right now, and as we've been involved in doing a lot of youth development work as we've been developing our integrated youth mental health partnerships around the state. We've been really impressed with the resiliency of our young people. And while certainly, as you mentioned, people talk about the period from 12 to 25 as the second 0 to 3 in terms of ongoing brain development. As much as we've seen young people struggling through these challenges, we've also seen young people show tremendous resiliency in terms of reaching out to each other, supporting each other. The youth voice has become sort of much more important. And I think even on a national level, when, our Surgeon General did a report, recently about concerns related to the crisis in youth mental health, one of their important recommendations was really listening to the voice of young people who really still, in spite of their challenges and struggles, have a good sense of what they need. And, as you well know, it's been very important for us to, to learn from people from their own lived experience and really take their expertise in hand and really allow their voices to guide our efforts.
That's an incredibly important thing to remember as we go forward and try and help young people with their struggles. Let them lead from their lived experience in terms of guiding us. That's important. So with regards to solutions and helping young people manage their mental health challenges, you've been a champion of implementing an analog to Australia's mental health system for young people throughout California. And there are many needs that young people have regarding mental health. How might some of the parts of this Australian mental health model help address some of those needs for mental health support for young people today?
It's a great question, and thank you. I think the model you're referencing from Australia was called Headspace, and these are standalone clinics they developed 10 15 years ago for young people 12 to 25 to come in on their own or with a friend for early mental health related issues and challenges. And so we have been very excited to be developing sort of our own US version of that model called Alcove. And within the development of that, what we're seeing, first of all, as we mentioned, is a very powerful youth voice. Each Alcove Center has a very active youth advisory group that's guiding the model, the service delivery, all of the components. And then in addition, community collaborative networks that also for each center are linking parents, youth, city, county leaders, schools, other health and mental health agencies together to support the development of these programs. And within these Alcove centers, we're working with young people to create a space for young people to come in for a moment of pause, to be able to get early mental health support, early primary care support, support education, employment, early substance use treatment, as well as peer support. And the peer support has been a critical piece of this model as well. And so right now we've started these centers in Santa Clara County through a partnership with the visionary leaders of Santa Clara County, and are now working through a partnership with the Mental Health Commission within the state to support the development of 5 more Alcove centers. And we have other communities that are also interested. And what's been important about them is that, these are places by and for young people to come in before things get to a crisis point to get that early support.
I love that. That gives me so much hope to hear that young people are helping each other through the program of the Alcove system as you're describing. And it sounds like it has great potential. I mean, if you can implement something like this in a state like California, where there's so much like where it's through the mental health handled through counties, it's like a fragmented mental health system in that regard. It's not a statewide system. But if you can succeed in California, perhaps the whole nation could adopt something like this.
Well, there's a lot of interest that's coming out of other states as well. And so, we're hoping that that's possible too. And as we're looking at these models, we really see them as part of all public mental health framework for early intervention, really. And, we're excited about the work happening nationally and at the state level around school mental health. And we really see this continuum from school mental health to these Alcove centers, to the really important work, you and others are involved in also around supporting people with clinical high risk or a first episode of a psychotic illness as well. And we see that whole continuum as really critical in terms of a public mental health early intervention framework.
Yeah, that continuum is key. It's great to see you're connecting all these factors together, all these systems and supports together for whatever young people may be dealing with. They have a way to get in and get the support they need. Great job. Thank you. So we've talked a lot about the hope that's imminent and that people can take heart in learning about. Last question is, when it comes to mental health, stigma can be a major factor in preventing people from seeking the care that they need. In fact, people often want to hide the mental health challenges they're experiencing. I did for many years when I developed schizophrenia. I didn't tell anybody besides my family and close friends, and that was a big burden at the time. But so what are, for adults who care about the young people in their lives, what are some of the warning signs they can look out for if some young person might be struggling, that they can then help them get some help?
So a lot of the things, that we see early on when young people are struggling are, often related to increasing isolation, increasing withdrawal. For many young people, there might be changes in their sleep pattern, changes in their eating pattern, lack of interest in what were regular activities. Even when some people might be experiencing confusion in their thinking, there's a tendency to want to withdraw because things might feel too stimulating or confusing or or complicated in that way. And so I think sort of looking at sort of changes in general functioning, I think become a really important first sign. And I think it's important to check in with people. And I think one of the things, as you mentioned, for those of us that are parents, and now that for me as a grandparent, I think what's also really important in terms of breaking down the stigma is for us, like you just shared, to be more willing to be more open about our own experiences or challenges with mental health, so that our young people don't feel the need to keep it so so quiet, keep it so much to themselves. And I think if we all can feel more comfortable sharing, our own experiences, it will help young people then feel more comfortable talking about what they're facing in a more open and honest way, much earlier in their process, and get that early intervention support.
Absolutely. That's so wise. Actually, another important question I wanted to cover with you, and that is around, there have been so many school shootings taking place, so many shootings in schools. And this is a very scary thing that both young people and their parents are dealing with. How do you talk with young people and counsel them when they express concern and fear around the prospect of school shootings growing in our country?
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of things that are important in relation to school shooting. I think one of the things that's really important is that as much as, we hear this sort of relationship to mental illness for people involved in school shootings, the data doesn't support that idea. And that, the people that have been involved in these shootings generally are not people that are dealing with a mental illness. And for the most part, people with mental health conditions are victims of violence and not perpetrators. And I think it's important to remember that up front. I think when we're looking at supporting our young people, the first thing we need to do is sort of deal with our own anxiety, our own sense of loss and fear, and find the support we need to address those issues ourselves. And then with our young children, the conversations will really vary depending on the developmental stage of our young person. I think what often becomes important is really seeing what questions our young people have, and our children at different ages, and not having a sense of a need to over-explain, from our own perspectives, what might have happened, or, not presume to guess what kind of questions our children might have. And I think what's important is to see what questions they have, be direct and honest with, answering them about the situation. I think talking with them about how we sort of can also sometimes become fearful and how we choose to cope with it becomes really important. And then really just keeping the door open for them to come back and ask us other questions as they might think things through and struggle with them a little bit more as well.
Wow, that's such great advice. Steve, you are so wise, and that's wonderful wisdom to share. As a grandparent and a professor, you are certainly a great source of inspiration and wisdom for our viewers today. Steve, thank you so much for being on Brainwaves again today with us. It's been great to talk with you. Viewers, thank you too. If you would like to learn more about this film, Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness, you may visit PBS's resource website at wellbeings.org. Please be sure to check out the film when it premieres on PBS stations around the country, June 27th and 28th. And if you'd like to view any of our past Brainwaves episodes or sign up for our newsletter to learn about future Brainwaves episodes, please visit onemind.org/brainwaves. Remember, what is your brain good for? Making waves, of course. Please join us next time on Brainwaves.
Mental health is stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight.
I think I need help.
Can you talk?
Struggling.
I'm here.
Depressed. Can't sleep.
But we need the science and solutions to change lives. Now, more than ever, we are in this fight together. We are of one mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.
I'm living my best life.